Welcome to the Unbreakable Boundaries podcast with your host, myself, Jennifer Maneely. I have a really special guest today. Her name is Karen Perlmutter, and she is a therapist. Her website and all of her awesome information is you can find that at collaborativecounselingllc.com. And I just want to kind of introduce her just really quickly. I've had a couple of really amazing conversations. I'm so excited because it's so hard in this field where you find other people who are very interested in working with the family side of people that have substance abuse issues. So whenever I find them, I get so excited. And Karen has over a decade of experience working as a therapist that specializes in treatment of substance abuse and mental illness and has developed a particular interest in supporting the holistic needs of families who are affected by these struggles, which I think is just amazing. I think the more people we can find uh, that help the families, the better we all are. She has developed an evidence-based curriculum for families coping with substance use and enjoys speaking in a variety of settings, offering education, skills, and hope. I have actually started going through some of her course that she has put together, which is amazing. And that's where I thought we could start. But Karen, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah. And I actually I told her right before I hit the record button that I had started her course, and where she starts is something that is called the mountain. And I love the analogy of the mountain because it just makes things so clear, because one of the things that I struggle with the most is uh, finding that families have a hard time understanding what their role is, what their part is with their loved one. They're like, but my loved one is the problem. I don't
Yeah,
have the problem that they have. There's nothing wrong with me.
sure.
And Karen does a great job of explaining that. So if you could just give your a little bit of the mountain.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think in order to understand that metaphor, and I am an incredibly visual metaphorical person, so the whole course, every session is a different metaphor actually, to help me wrap my head around these incredibly complex concepts. But I think in order to understand where that visual comes from, I want to share a little bit about my history and the work that I've done, because it's directly related to why I view it the way that I view it. So, I started my career actually about 20 years ago, working in sort of an underserved population, mostly folks struggling with opiate addictions, sort of unemployed, underemployed, lower socioeconomic demographic. So, within a short period of time, I really fell in love with the work. I found the clients to be, sensitive and compassionate and creative and intelligent and things that I guess I didn't expect to find with the addicted population and really just fell in love with the work. But what was a complete blind spot for me for the whole first, I mean, almost 10 years of my career was that there was another side to this story. And the reason I mention that I worked with a lower socioeconomic group originally, the reason that is relevant is that their families, uh, I imagine, just didn't have the resources to be a part of the therapeutic process, right? Maybe they didn't have their own car, to get there, or they had to work several jobs, or they had their own untreated mental health issues, or all the things that people struggle with when there's poverty. I can only imagine that there was for every one of the recovering clients I worked with a family that was also suffering alongside them. But it really, I mean, I'm a little embarrassed to say it, but it is what it is. They were a blind spot for me. Like I
Yeah.
saw these clients in a vacuum, right? Like they came in, they were sort of an entity of themselves, and I didn't think of them as part of a greater system. We just wanted to treat them and help them through their trauma and their coping skills and to rebuild their lives. And it wasn't till significantly later in my career, that I took a job at a medical institution that we had more of a mix. We still served, the lower socioeconomic population, but because it was an institution with a really good reputation, we also started seeing, uh, you know, more affluent families. We started seeing, people with professional lives and careers,
Right.
engineers and, physicians were now my clients. And that's a bit more of an empowered group of people, which means their families also are a bit more empowered and they're showing up and saying, like, we want to be a part of this process, and I'm concerned about my kid, and I want to know, I want to know what to do about my husband, and where are the resources for me, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Uh, so, therein grew I began the journey of understanding that there was an entire other side of the mountain, so to speak. So I began thinking of addiction as something that really sort of sits at the top. I mean, it was evident to me that, the person struggling with the disease is not the bad guy. I had spent 10 years at that point, getting to know these people who were often hurting,
Hmm.
deeply sensitive people, sometimes, kind of tormented folks, but not bad people. Many of them had done bad things, but they weren't bad people. Bad guys. I was like, well, the disease is the bad guy, not the person struggling. Uh, and then there's this whole other side, right? And they're struggling too. And in some ways that are very similar to their addicted loved one, and in some ways very different, but struggling nonetheless in sort of this parallel way. And the other thing that struck me as so interesting was how little understanding the addicted or recovering person, how little their understanding was of what their family was going through, and how little the family understood what the addicted person was truly going through. They could see the damage that the person was doing, but to
Right.
really understand their pain. And I thought, oh my God, it's like a mountain. They can't see around to the other side. So I became really fascinated with that concept and wanting to help both sides and almost build a bridge between those two worlds to help them sort of collectively fight the bad guy, which was the disease,
Right.
not each other.
Yeah. Which I think is a great analogy where it's like you're just on either sides of the mountain, right? You can't see around it really. So you can't really understand what each one of you're going through. And then each side of the mountain has something different that they're working on. It's a different
Right.
challenge, right? It's not that uh uh like the loved one with the addiction that has their set of challenges over on one side of the mountain, and then you got the families that have their set of challenges, which is not the same challenges even if it is in the context. What would you say would be for the family side the challenge that they're facing the most when it comes to their loved one?
Well, I think, interestingly enough, some of the parallels or some of the issues that the family is facing, in a strange way, sort of mirror the problems that the addicted person is facing. And I know
Mm-hmm.
that sounds strange, right?
Right.
Because the family isn't, let's say that a person is deep in addiction and desperate and doing what they need to do to get to their drug, and they're, forging checks or something like that. I'm not suggesting like, oh, the family's on the other
Right.
side of the mountain and they're also forging checks,
Right.
right? That doesn't,
Right.
that doesn't make a lot of sense. But I tend to find that there's, an addicted person develops obsession with their drug. They develop compulsive behaviors to get to their drug and sort of start losing their sense of identity and, their healthy sense of self as this disease progresses. The same sort of things happen to the family. It just looks a little bit different. Like the obsession on the family side is not with getting to a drug, but it's with fixing their loved one, right?
Right. Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
so I end up thinking of like, an addicted person goes through the day with this chatter in their head, constantly thinking about, how to hide what they're doing, how to maintain their self-image, how to continue denying what they need to deny to make it through the day. That chatter is constantly going in their ear about how to keep all their lies, organized and that sort of thing. The family has chatter too, but it looks more like, what is my loved one up to? What are they doing? Are they did they make it to that interview? Like, I don't know. They looked funny. Their eyes looked strange to me last night. Should I confront them? Should I not confront them? Are they going to get mad? Should I walk on eggshells? There's so, I think that uh, the family begins to lose their own identity too a little bit because they're trying to live in two worlds. They're trying to
Mhm.
live their own life, and then they're also almost obsessing over their loved one's life. Um, because I mean, it's coming from a place of love and fear and
Right.
shame and all those things. They just want their family to be okay. They want their loved one to be okay, but it becomes almost an obsession. So I think that probably the biggest challenge is trying to navigate your own world while also sort of
Mhm.
living with one foot in somebody else's.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting because and I don't know about you, and this may hold true for you, it may not, but a lot of the times I'm working with the families that don't know anything really about addiction and substance use, and they're just out here just kind of floundering. Because a
Yeah.
lot of times I think families, like, they have this vision in their mind about what a family of substance use looks like, right?
Yeah.
Everybody is
Sure.
doing drugs with everybody, and not that that
Yes.
doesn't happen, absolutely, but
Right.
that's in a really extreme example a lot of
Yeah.
times where, but that's kind of what our picture has a tendency to be. And then you have these families that are
Sure.
struggling. They're like, I don't know anything about this world. I don't know
Mm.
anything about what to do. This wasn't how I raised Johnny. This wasn't how
Right.
Sarah was supposed to be. Like, they had these big dreams ahead of them, right,
Yeah.
for their kids. And then that kind of starts looking a little different as they go on.
Mhm.
So, I guess my question then is around that is like, what would you say? And I know you have like the mountain,
Mhm.
but when you have someone that doesn't know anything about substance use, what's like one of the first things that you tell people in terms of education around addiction?
Yeah. I think that there is this natural, I call it the desperation for restoration, which is kind of a mouthful, but it's like this desperation to restore your person, to bring them back to their best self, right? Like I always say, like if you're a parent, you remember that child when they were, a beautiful little 4-year-old swirling around the living room, or, oh, they had so much, potential in baseball in middle school, or it's like, how did we get here, right? Like I call the family the torchbearer. Like you're the one who is like holding that knowledge of how amazing this person could be, uh, and you want so badly. I mean, sometimes even more than they want it for themselves, right? To get
Right.
restored. So we're sort of sometimes like trying to drag our loved one back to sanity with us. And sometimes they don't want it. Sometimes they're not ready for it. Sometimes they don't feel worthy of it. Sometimes they want it, but truly don't know how to get there. And it becomes like the blind leading the blind, right? Because
Right.
you as a family member who maybe has no knowledge of addiction, you can't be the Sherpa that brings them back to recovery because
Right.
that's not your journey. You don't know, right? In fact, they'll get very like often annoyed and critical, like, what, you don't know about this. Don't tell me how to do it. You're not in recovery. You don't know anything about this, which is kind of true.
Yeah.
So, I think families have such good intentions, and so many families end up sort of making the same choices. They end up like just doing the same things that ultimately are unproductive or counterproductive. I'll give an example, which is that the family keeps thinking like, well, my loved one is stressed, like maybe because they've gotten into this hole of addiction, and now they have, a record, they can't get a job, or they don't have money to buy a car. Maybe we'll just buy them a car and they'll get back on their feet if we could just, there's sort of this like if we could stay one step ahead of them, maybe we can pave the path for them, right?
Right.
And it's not, and that's just one example out of so many that families sort of predictably fall into that like it just makes sense that if we just do these things they'll turn a corner or we'll help them get on the right track. And I always, remind families, that's not an illogical thought. I mean, you're playing by the rules. The disease doesn't play by the
Right.
rules, though.
It's
This
different, a
particular
whole different
disease,
set of rules.
yes, I think one thing that's really strange to me is, I don't know if this was implied from what I was saying. I'm sort of an anomaly in my field because I'm not in recovery, and many of my colleagues are in recovery. That's why they choose this field. But after working with addiction for 20 years in a strange way, like I feel like it's like I sort of speak the language. It makes sense to me. Like there is a
Right.
logic that addiction follows.
Hmm.
It's just not yours, right?
Right.
It's not
It's it
logical.
right. But it is predictable
It is,
when you know the
yeah.
rules, when
Yes,
you
yeah.
understand the
How
world,
addiction
the
ticks, right? Like,
universe.
yeah,
It is a very predictable thing, and that's
it
one of the
is.
things that I, try to kind of teach families that I work with is the level
Okay.
of predictability. I was like, listen, I know
Yes,
exactly where they're at, and I can pretty much pinpoint what's getting ready to happen next. Now, I'm not a fortune
yes,
teller. It just
yes,
means that I'm just that predictable because I understand the rules and the
yes, that's
context
right.
that we're in this world. So,
Right. Your loved one is not predictable, but the disease is,
right,
right? Just like certain types of cancers, we can sort of guesstimate how it's going to progress because
mhm,
we've seen that type of cancer progress that way so many times. I didn't really answer your question, but I guess my answer would be the first step for families is to remove the shame. I
yeah,
say you fell into the same, I call it the witch's brew or the co-addicted stew. I say you fell into the pot. You didn't mean to. Every family does because
right,
you tried to respond rationally to an irrational disease. So the first step is to remove the shame and then jump into the education, right? You
right,
have to sort of say, listen, we truly were doing what made sense to us, but now we see we need to educate ourselves and understand how this particular disease works
right,
so that we can recalibrate to playing a healthier role. And I
right,
mean, that's really why I created the course because I wanted families to understand not only what the rule book was, but what is the family's role in navigating all of this.
right.
And it does look quite different than I think what intuition brings us to.
Right. And you had mentioned a little bit of shame, so I just want to tap into that a little bit because this is something
Sure.
that I feel like families really suffer a lot with, and most people, maybe not all of them, but most people are suffering with this idea that they think that somehow that the addiction, the substance use, somehow it was their fault,
Yeah.
right? And that now they're trying to, it seems like they're trying to rectify
Mm,
some sort of fault
yeah.
that they've created in their mind that's not something. So when you got
Yeah.
family members that are struggling with this idea, well, how do you help navigate them through that?
Sure. I think that there are certain things in life that do kind of nicely and neatly fall into what I call A plus B equals C logic.
Hmm.
Right? Like you kick a ball, it rolls across the room. No, I got that wrong. But like
Right,
your foot touches the ball, it rolls across the room, and therefore the ball has rolled, or that kind of thing, right?
right,
Like that makes sense. There are things in life that function that way. Addiction and the family role is just simply not an A plus B equals C formula. And I think for parents, a lot of times it looks like this. A represents a parent's only job is to produce a child that launches successfully into the world, right? And like, looks good, acts good, becomes a contributing member of society. Like, A, it's my only job to do that, right? And then B is, well, my kid didn't do that. My kid has problems. Like all my friends' kids are finishing law school and getting married, and my kid just got arrested again, right? Or whatever the scenario is. So that's B. So then in their mind, it has to become C, right? It's like, well, therefore I must have been a bad parent. Like, where did I miss the
Right.
memo on how everyone else got it right? And that's not what happened in our story. And I mean, I understand. I think our brains want to rectify things in very clean ways, even
Mhm.
if it means beating ourselves up, right? Like we
Right.
want to be if it's like, well, I want to make sense of this, so it must just be that I was a terrible parent. I think again, it goes back to the education that this disease is sort of a tangled web. It's a disease, and there's a few other diseases like this, but not a ton that have biological components. They have psychological components, like traumas and underlying depression and anxiety, genetics, that come into it. There's social components. And I don't just mean like who your peer group is. When we say social
Mhm.
components, we're always like, oh, they hung out with the wrong kids in high school or something. And that can be part of it, but social components means a lot of different things. It could even be like, we were a home that, didn't talk about feelings a lot, or maybe there was an intergenerational pattern of trauma that we didn't start, that started 3 generations earlier, that sort of led to a cycle of shame and secrecy or privacy or different things like that, could be social contributors. And then sort of a spiritual element to it also. And I don't mean religious. I'm going to define spiritual as like a sense of purpose, meaning, and
Mhm.
connection, right? And there's a
Mhm.
million reasons why a person could lose their way with purpose, meaning, and connection in the world that has nothing to do with how their parents raised them, right? There's
Right.
a lot of, you could have a miscarriage, you could lose your job, you could, be burned by a friend. There's a million things that could happen. So, I think we want to oversimplify this, but I think when we really look at the picture of what role we played in this, I think there are times that we can, once we do understand that whole biological, psychological, social, spiritual disease, and say, well, there's a lot of parts that feed into what creates addiction, we can have a more realistic look and say, all right, well, I remember this one dad, I drew this visual out, which I'm not drawing out for you, but it kind of showed the 4 components. And I explained I gave like many examples of things that could happen in a person's life and,
Mhm.
genetics and family history and all sorts of stuff. And the dad looking at it with this kind of cocked face and couldn't tell what he was thinking. And he goes, I thought I caused the whole thing. I caused like 5%. And he goes, I can live with 5%, and he goes, and I can work on the 5%. I can make amends for the stuff, like if
Right.
there, yeah, maybe I wasn't super emotionally available when he was a kid, but I was, doing the best I could and I can do better now. And, I think I think we can kind of put it all in perspective and realize we,
Right.
we were doing the best we could with what we had. And if there were a couple things that we needed to do differently or have a different perspective on now, okay, it's never too late to work on those things, but that doesn't mean that we were powerful enough to cause the disease.
Right. Absolutely not. And to that end, there's like a lot of like different culture things too that happen. Because I know that I have family members that are constantly telling me, and one, that comparison thing, right? Well, Johnny's not, you know, Bobby over here is getting out of law school, and Johnny is, just getting out of treatment for the 20th time,
Yes,
right?
yes,
And
yeah.
it's like, how do I sell it?
Exhausting.
Like, it's exhaust that whole comparison thing. But then, how often do parents actually feel that pressure from their community?
Mm,
Of like, hey, get your kid in check. Or
right.
the subtle things that sometimes you hear, like I'll be out talking to someone that's not really familiar with any of this. They have young kids and they'll say, "Oh, I would never let my kids
I
behave like that
know.
or do
Yeah,
that." Or like, what's wrong with this? So we have that culture thing as
sure.
well. And this is something that I spend a great deal of time working with families on is paying attention
Yes.
to the culture, right? And being mindful of when we hear that, not to take those things to heart and personally.
Right.
So, what would you say to someone who's just really struggling both? These are two kind of different things, but I'm going to lump them into one question. But
Mm,
that
sure.
that culture as well as the comparison, because I do think some of it
Yeah.
ties in together as well.
I think for some families, the temptation is to isolate, um,
Mm,
because you just don't want to go to church and see the people whose kids are
right.
doing great, right? Or you don't want to really let people know how insane your home was last night, or how bad things got and your kid was high and screaming that they were going to kill themselves, or some of these horrible things that sort of ensue, and then we have to kind of smile for the neighbors, right? So I think a lot of times people choose to isolate, and I mean, it's sort of like the disease festers on isolation. Like the disease is winning,
Mm,
like for both the addicted person and for the family, when isolation is the choice that you make. But that being said, it's true. There's a lot of people that just simply won't understand what your experience is. And you're right, particularly when they have younger kids. I mean, my goodness, we all have all sorts of things to say about how
yeah.
other people are doing things wrong until we've been in their shoes. I think one of the most essential pieces of sanity for families going through this is to be amongst other families that are going through similar things. To
Yeah.
sort of, I always say, like, just sort of like an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting is for a recovering alcoholic. I mean, it's just as important that we sort of find our ways to wherever these family support communities exist, whether they're on the internet or Al-Anon meetings. Where I live in Charleston, South Carolina, there's a lot of family support communities. There's quite a few to choose from, which I know is rare. But these families sort of huddle together. It's like they get together in sort of the corners of society, and they meet on Monday nights, and a bunch of them come, 30, 40, 50 families, and they can see that there's other wonderful families out there. They're looking around being like, well, these people don't look half bad. Like they seem like they were probably good parents. They kind of, talk like me, look like me. And they sort of find this collective place where they can sort of laugh together, cry together, sometimes have that dark humor that you have only with people who understand your pain.
Yeah.
And I think that's really healing for the families, whether you get it through the internet, if you don't live in a place like Charleston, or you find communities in your
Mm,
local area. I think it's a sanity saver. It's like you go through your life with a lot of people that don't fully understand, like what a shit show your home was last night, or what you're dealing with, but like on Monday night or Thursday night or whatever night you go to your group, like you're going to be with your people, and they're going to
yeah.
get it. And everyone's going to be like nodding and saying like, amen, girl, I get it. Or amen, but you buddy, like I understand, and like you'll know you're not crazy because you're not the only family going through this. I
Right.
can I can tell you, if you're out there and you don't know anyone else who is facing this, because a lot of families tragically don't know a single other family going through
Right.
this that I meet. I can tell you, I mean, the majority of my career is families parading into my office that can all relate to this idea of, their kid is the one who's struggling in this way or that way. You are most certainly not alone. You just kind of have to find your people.
Yeah. Yeah. That's such a big thing. I read a lot of Brene Brown. I love Brene Brown,
Yeah,
and
amazing.
she talks. This has been one of the more helpful things in terms of that comparison, that listening to people. She talks about the arena, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
she. I'm summing it up. This is not her exact words, but I'm summing
sure.
it up and through my interpretation, where it's like, don't listen to people who aren't in the same arena as
Yes, yeah,
you,
yes.
right? Because it's like, yes, if we're working out of the same playbook, if we have the same understanding, this similar experiences that we can relate, then yes, we can help each other. But outside of that, people who are in that arena can't really give us what it is that we're looking for, what we need, or the understanding, or any
Yeah.
of those things. So that whole thing, and I think a lot about that in my life too, is
Mm.
because I mean, I'm always getting unsolicited advice, just because that's people are just love to help, right? People just love to help.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I'm like, okay, I listen, but sometimes I'm like, but you're not even close to the same arena that I'm
Right.
that I'm in. And so then I can kind of, you know, move that on. So thank you for going into that. But you said something that reminded me. I wanted to touch on this. You had said something about their kid screaming that they're going to kill themselves, which
Yeah.
is not an uncommon
Wow.
pattern of behavior. It seems so unpredictable and so,
Yeah.
you know, th that kind of, I don't want to call it dramatic in a negative way, but it is,
Yeah.
it's pretty
Dysregulated
dramatic.
for
It's
sure. Yeah.
dysregulated.
Yeah.
And that always sends like the parents in a tailspin and
Hmm.
all of these things. What would be some, I guess, guidance to give families who are struggling when you do have a kid that is consistently threatening
Right.
suicide, whether overtly or subliminally?
Right. Well, I think that type of language holds you hostage, right? I mean, the minute somebody says, I'm going to kill myself, you're sort of paralyzed with this sense of responsibility that if I make the next wrong move, then they could die because of me, right?
Hmm.
Because I read this wrong or did the wrong thing. And so it becomes sort of a hostage situation. And you know, there's a lot of reasons people use that type of language, particularly addicted folks, and it's not always manipulative. Sometimes, though, they do learn the power of those words and realize that they can kind of hold you hostage. Like I said, that's not always the case, but um, there's I think even when I was a young clinician, that language obviously scared me, right? I would sort of freeze in the way a family would, like, oh my gosh, I have to now go into this protocol and make sure I do everything right. And over the years, I've learned that that phrase really means a lot of different things
Hmm.
at different times for people, right? So I will say this, the disease of addiction is one that I've come to call a disease of discomfort intolerance,
Hmm.
which means that over time, a person struggling with addiction becomes less and less able to tolerate what we see as a normal spectrum of discomforts that happen in one's life. Right. And I say like anything from the mundane, like sitting in traffic, that we get annoyed, but it's like, well, that's life. Everyone's sitting in traffic right now. Like I'm not unique in that way,
Right.
all the way to more extreme, like death of a loved one, that kind of thing. So the disease naturally, it's one of those predictable elements of addiction. It naturally, uh, over time, makes somebody less tolerant of discomfort, and you end up. Are you allow swearing light on this
Yeah,
on this call?
I
Okay,
allow all swearing,
you
even
encourage it. Okay,
I
good.
encourage it. Yeah.
Uh, so I always say, like, we all understand that discomfort comes on a spectrum, like, and we deal with different degrees of like, ooh, my office is chilly, all the way
Right.
to like really extreme stressors. For an addicted person, that all becomes over time just like a big, I say, like, picture it as like this big messy ball of yarn that's all
Mm.
tangled, and it's just called shit I can't handle. The
Right.
whole thing.
Yeah.
It's shit I can't handle, right? And for them, a lot of, I'm digressing a little bit, but it's sort of relevant to my answer. Uh, Recovery ultimately is the unraveling of that
Mhm.
yarn and helping them get back to seeing that they can tolerate discomfort and they don't need to run from it, don't need to escape it. It can be a very long process of unraveling the yarn and learning coping tools. But uh, the reason I say that is that it is fairly common that somebody in addiction is going to more quickly get to the I can't handle this shit
Right.
state of mind than somebody who maybe has a bigger tolerance for discomfort in their life, if that makes sense, right? So we're
Yeah.
more likely to say, like, I'm just going to kill myself or something like that. So uh, the first thing I will say is this, as a family member, you are not responsible to be their suicide assessor.
Mhm.
And I am qualified to
Right.
do suicide assessment, right? I'm a licensed therapist. I still would not want to be the final
Right.
word on that with if it was my own child or my own husband, because I'm too emotionally involved, right? So I don't, with what I'm going to share, I don't want you to feel that you need to put on your clinician's hat with your loved one. If you have any
Right.
question, then you let someone who is a professional, but also B, not emotionally entangled in the outcome, be the one to make these decisions. But I do think it's important for families to understand that suicidal language is also a continuum.
Yeah.
Uh, and sometimes a person is saying it because they really just want you to know that they're feeling overwhelmed. So they're using big language
Right.
to let you know that, sort of the way a toddler is like screaming because they can't have a cookie. They just want you to know, like, I'm feeling overwhelmed right now. But they actually have no intention to kill themselves, and
Right.
they have no intent, they wouldn't do it. They don't want to. They don't want to end their life. They want to live. They're just using big language to prove a point. Uh, on the way other end of that continuum, there is somebody who has truly reckoned with the idea of their life ending
Right.
and have sort of accepted the reality of that. They think they're a burden to society or their family, and they truly are prepared to end their life. And then there's all these places in the middle, right? Like there are people that will, if you ask them further, like, what did you mean when you said that? Or even give them, sometimes I'll give clients like almost multiple choice options because they might not have the language. They
Right.
don't know what they mean when they say it because they maybe haven't done that emotional intelligence work yet. Uh, it might be like, well, if the plane I'm on crashes, that would be fine, but I wouldn't actually do anything about it,
Right.
right? Or like if I didn't wake up one day, life's been hard, I'd be okay with that. But like, oh God, no, I would never actually like initiate killing myself.
Right.
So there's really a whole continuum. So with families and my recovering clients, I introduce the concept language precision. And I say, if we're going to use language like that, we need to be as precise as possible. Because if somebody means that they, have a gun, are not afraid to use it, have reckoned with the end of their life, then the intervention is going to look really different than if they're just trying to tell us that they're overwhelmed and
Struggling.
want to
Yeah.
use big words to explain that, right? So I will often educate the families on the different points on that continuum. So they have that language and they could say, can you help me understand what you mean when you say that?
Right.
Right. And if they're not able to get more clarity, if the person says right away, like, oh, I was just saying it to be dramatic or whatever, fine, then we have an answer. If they still feel unclear, we always default to, I'm going to take you seriously.
Right.
Well, even if you're not serious, I'm going to take you seriously and treat it like a serious posturing towards self-harm. If the loved one is not serious, that the language will change quickly because they don't want to be admitted to a psych hospital just because they're not using precise language, if that makes sense.
Right. Right. I like how you define that and kind of you know, I guess diving in a little bit more to create that, precise language and giving them the opportunity to re-describe what
Yeah.
it is. And that kind of navigates through because, as you had said, sometimes it's not a manipulation, but sometimes it
Yeah.
is a manipulation, right?
Yes.
And we
That,
can't always
that-
tell, like, where we live on that. And it's like, you shouldn't have to. Like you said, you're
yes.
not the
Not your job.
professional.
Not
Like,
your job. If it's sort of a quick clarification, I mean, one time, one of my kids used language like that, and I stopped and I said, "Those are really serious words. So we're going to stop right here in the conversation, and we're going to clarify what you meant by that,
right,
if you can." And I gave him some options, like along that continuum, because I didn't think he would know what the options were. I mean, I don't think
right.
he had thought it through enough to know what he meant. And he very quickly clarified for me, I just want you to know how pissed I am. And I said,
Yeah,
great, let's use that language then. Let's say you have no idea how pissed I am. And it was it was just like a gentle correction on language precision,
yeah.
which was helpful. If I had any lingering questions after that, he did clarify it for me. But if I had any lingering questions, I would have pursued professional support.
Well, and this is because we're talking about language, we're talking about giving people options, and it's fascinating and interesting to me, like how little, and I struggle with this myself sometimes, where I need like some help in terms of languaging what it is that I'm experiencing,
Yeah,
because it's like I don't
totally.
always know what it is. I can just feel like when you do have, as you described, that big ball of yarn, of
Yeah.
like shit I just can't handle. It does get to that point because it's like it's just a big ball of yarn. I
Yeah.
don't can't
All
even
feels
find
big.
the end to start
Yes.
unraveling it.
It's so true. It's
Uh,
so true. Yeah.
Right. And it's like, I think
Yeah.
a lot of times this is what, families are experiencing, where they're
Yes.
experiencing this big ball of yarn and they don't even know where the end is to start unraveling. But then you also like societally, and they're like, oh, you just need to go get some help for yourself and
Mm.
whatever. And it's like, well, that's not helping me find the end of the yarn to start unraveling
Right.
this like big thing that I have going on that I don't even know how to articulate. And people like,
Yeah.
oh, you got to ask for what you need. You got to ask for help. And they're
I
like,
don't know what I
but
need.
I
Right.
don't know what it is that I need because I can't
Yes.
even make sense of the feelings that I'm experiencing and the experiences. Like I don't know. I don't know how to ask for what I need. And I think that's really
Mhm.
like an important thing to kind of dive in a little bit is how does someone ask for help when they don't even know what it is that they need?
Yeah, that's what a great question. And I think that it really is. I mean, sometimes it's sort of like th this comes in stages, right? Like there's three steps to this. If we're in a forest fire, metaphorically, the first step is that we need to make the fire stop burning, right?
Right,
The second step is that we need to maybe fly over the forest with a helicopter and assess the damage, inventory the damage, right? And then the third is we need to start like regrowing trees, like dropping
right,
seeds and watching them like begin to regrow, that kind of thing, right? So I think in some ways we have to figure out which stage of that we're in,
right,
right? Like, is the fire still burning? Am I still like in the insanity of all of this? Or is it like, okay, my loved one has gone off to long-term rehab and or I just set a boundary and walked away from my addicted spouse and I'm now in a safe space or, like where am I in that journey,
right.
right? And, I think that the expectation that I'm going to be able to begin unraveling all of the emotions that come with this right away is probably just unrealistic. In fact, this is very similar because I work with recovering substance abusers and I work with families as
Hmm.
both in my practice, often separately, sometimes together, but I have both demographics in my caseload, and it usually is about. I mean, this might sound extreme if you're sort of new to the journey or still like very much in it, but it's usually not until about a year, sometimes 2 years after the fire has stopped burning that we are able to, in any productive way, begin unraveling like the whole emotional, like, WTF was that, right?
Right.
Like, what did
Yeah.
we just go through kind of thing? Like, oh my God, like, what was that? So I don't actually ask for that journey early on.
Right.
That comes naturally, like it comes organically. Clients will come in
Right.
after that have continued to see me after like a year and they're like, I just feel this need to start sharing some things I haven't shared with you before about what I'm like, all right, great, let's do
Awesome.
that.
Right. Awesome. Yeah.
You're ready now, right? Like I had a colleague that said like your house was on fire and the doorknob has finally cooled down enough to like open it and go
Right.
in, right? So I'm like, great, the doorknob has cooled down enough,
Right.
or the forest fire has cooled down enough that we can actually walk through and begin assessing. Like that's great. But I think there's an expectation that we're supposed to do that work really early on. And from a therapy perspective, I don't have that expectation. In
Right.
fact, I don't find it productive early on to try to unpack all the trauma of it. I think really it's practical things that happen first, um, getting yourself aligned with people that are further in the journey as a family,
Hmm.
sort of finding those people at Al-Anon that are further in the process to take you under their wing,
Right.
or finding a therapist that can help you figure out the basics of like, how do I feel safe tonight when I get home? Or how can we get through this, this period and get my loved one off to treatment so I can breathe or, whatever. I think a
Right.
lot of it is very, very practical early, and the more kind of existential journey happens much later.
Yes. Yes. I definitely agree with that. Like when we're kind of in that crisis mode, it's really hard to make any moves forward internally with ourselves and the
Yeah.
emotional stuff. It's like first we have to as my mom and I will laugh, we'll say we have to get the cow out of the ditch first, and
Yeah, there you go.
then we can start thinking about how it got
Yeah.
in there. But first, we just got to get the cow out of the ditch.
I think that's a great way to describe it. I mean, there are families that call me and I know they have so much work to do and they deserve, that's the word I always use. It's not that you're being punished like you need to
Right,
do. You have like, I don't mean like you're such a hot mess. You have so much work to do. I mean, like, my God, you've been in it. You deserve support here. So I'll find a family that, really deserves a tremendous amount of support, but I'm suggesting to them, you could go to this support group or you could, start taking my online course and I can see there, I mean, they're sort of looking at me like, you don't understand. My child's might overdose. Like, I'm not going to go take a yoga class. Like, no, like,
right,
right. I mean, and I get it. So I back off and I say, like, just like you said, the cow needs to get out of the ditch first and we need to, they're not going to see anything until their loved one is at least in a temporarily safe place, or we can figure out some sort of a short-term intervention to stabilize the boat from rocking. And
right,
that's usually where we begin.
right, right. Excellent. So I have one final question for you. And obviously, this is called the Unbreakable Boundaries podcast. And so I would love to kind of hear what would you say is like the most common boundary that you feel like you're telling your families to implement in their relationship with their loved one?
Okay, this is a great question. I'm going to give a little bit of a workaround answer
Okay.
because of the way I approach boundaries. And
Okay.
session 3 and 4 of the course uh, are my overview of the philosophical approach toward boundaries that I take. So I don't have like a specific, like I tell them
Sure.
not to drive the
Right,
car.
right.
Like I don't have a concrete one like that because I approach it more philosophically. Um, I use a model called value-based boundaries. And the reason I do that is because a lot of our boundaries, when we start this journey, are emotionally driven, right?
Mhm.
Like I'm angry at this person, so I'm gonna set an angry based boundary, right? Get
Right.
out of the house kind of thing,
Right.
right? And then I feel guilty. So then I sort of shift the playing field because I
Mm-hmm.
feel guilty that I kicked them out, right? And I like change the rule book. And then they take advantage. So then I feel resentful. So then I set a resentment-based boundary. And it sort of becomes like a dog chasing its tail. Like I say, like we start chasing our own emotional tail with our boundaries. Uh, I think, emotions are understanding our emotions. They are important information. If we feel resentful or we feel fear, those are important. That is important data to help us know what our
Mm-hmm.
boundaries are. But generally speaking, I really want families to be setting their boundaries based on what I call your highest prioritized
Mm-hmm.
values. And that means doing some work ahead of time. It doesn't mean in the moment, kind of doing a fly by the seat of your pants, kind of, you know, I'm going to decide right this minute what's going to happen kind of thing. Because, like I said, then you'll be feeling something different 5 minutes later, and then it's unreliable. Um, if we understand that what we need to feel sane, what we need for our children, what we need to be able to make it through our workday, to make it through our life, to have a stable home. What we need are values like safety,
Mm-hmm.
consideration, meaning everyone who lives in the house is as considerate as everybody else, right? Like, what we need is honesty. What we need is, you know, kindness or reciprocity or that kind of thing. If we can figure out what are the things that I need to live in a sane relationship with this person, that's where the boundaries end
Right.
up getting formed, right? So the question isn't what is my boundary? The question is what makes me feel unsafe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does
I
that make
really,
sense?
yeah. No, I really appreciate it. That's why I like so the
Mhm.
unbreakable boundaries, that's why I named it that, is because it does take a
Yeah.
much more philosophical approach like you were
Hmm.
explaining, which I think is a really wonderful answer, and thank you for answering it like that,
Sure.
because that is very in alignment with where it's like how do we, it's not like okay, this person does this and this is what you do. This person does this. It's more of like
Yes.
a lifestyle of being
It is a
very
life.
clear about what it is that you're willing to accept in your life and what it is that
Yeah,
you're not willing to accept based on the person that you want to be,
that's
right?
right.
Based on the things that you hold true. So it's like we set boundaries. Sometimes we may have to set boundaries around like behaviors, right?
Hmm.
Certain things around the safety, around the values that we want to maintain the
Right.
sanity in our lives, the things that we also need, right? Yes, they're needing things, but we can't always give them everything that they
Sure.
need. But it doesn't mean that we can't set our boundaries around some of the things that we need, right? So I really appreciate that answer, because that's like the unbreakable boundaries is that
Yeah.
lifestyle movement of how do you start trusting yourself? How do you start listening to yourself? How do you gain confidence in yourself to do these things for ourselves to create the life, no matter what's happening externally, that we need, right? And is it a
This
lot
is
is
one
that
of,
values?
yeah. I think this is one of those things that I had said earlier, and I think we were both saying, like, there's a lot that our intuition tells us to do when it comes to addiction that doesn't really work with addiction
Right.
specifically, right? Like, it doesn't fit with addiction. And I think that one of the things we intuitively think we're supposed to do is set boundaries that are actually kind of coercive. And I know
Hmm.
that word
Yeah,
sounds pretty dirty, but I don't mean
it
it a
is.
dirty way. Yeah, maybe. But I guess I mean like we think we're supposed to set a boundary to change or fix them, right? Like
Right.
I'm supposed to teach them a lesson or I'm supposed to let them know,
Right.
I'm setting a boundary to motivate them, right? I'm not going to buy you a car if you don't go to AA meetings or whatever, right? Like that's not a boundary. That's more of a coercion. You're trying to
Right.
change somebody else's behavior. What I have found, and I think, you know, 10 to 20 years of a longevity study on this, of, even just anecdotally, what I've seen over the 20 years, never mind what the research shows. I think one of the things that's really fascinating is trying to coerce another person into change, even though it's tempting, it's not effective. I've never
Right.
seen it be effective. In
It's
fact,
not.
what is effective, and I get to witness this so often that I mean I am drinking the Kool-Aid on this. I believe this. What is effective is that when you begin changing and
Hmm.
saying, I deserve relationships that have these values in it, and you just say, like, I want you in my life, but you're going to have to meet me over here with the
Right.
values rather than me continuing to bend toward you without the values. Uh, when you began having higher standards of what your relationships look like, including with your addicted loved one, more often than not, I will never make a promise your loved one will definitely change. I will never promise
Yeah.
that. But
That's out of
more
your
often,
control.
right, right. But more often than not, that becomes a pretty powerful influencer on your loved one because they start realizing they're not going to get what they want from you or from that relationship if they're not willing to join you in a more valued way of living. And that
Hmm.
becomes more intrinsically motivating to people to want to find recovery. And so when the
Right.
family changes and works on themselves, more often I see the addicted person kind of be
Yes.
like, "Oh, things are changing around here.
Absolutely.
I better start working on myself too." Right? And that
Right.
so it's so counterintuitive that the most productive thing we can do is A, help ourselves to help ourselves, but hey, it actually is more likely to trickle down
Right.
and increase our loved ones' likelihood
Right.
of better outcomes as well.
But we can't also try to help ourselves just to be coercive, right? Like,
Oh, girl, I have these conversations all the time with families. I'm like, what's your true
right there,
intention?
yeah, right.
I'm going
We're
to go to
trying to like
Al-Anon
find that
because
formula here, and it's just simply
yes,
not gonna work,
it's
right?
so true. I think it's misinterpreted so often through that old lens because families are so used to being kind of well-intended but coercive that it's like, well, I'm going to go to Al-Anon because maybe they'll copy me and go to
Because
AA. And it's like,
right, right,
right? Or I'm going to stop drinking because for my health, but really because I know they're watching and I hope they'll stop drinking too. We really have to tap in. What is my true intention? Is it because I deserve better?
right.
Or is it because I secretly am still trying to coerce them? I'm just
Right.
changing the language about how I'm doing it,
Well, and it's
right?
it's the same exact thing about like recovery too. It's like, we say to people like you can only recover for yourselves, you can't recover for anybody else. It doesn't mean that certain things won't get you there initially, right? So I
Yeah.
think a lot of times like the families come and they're trying to like learn how to get their kid to do or their loved one to do
Totally.
what they want them to do like that. They're trying to learn that formula and that's what kind of gets them in the
Yes.
door a lot. And then they start
Yeah.
learning over time that it's like, oh, this is really for me, this is what I got to do for me, this is the things. But at some point,
That's right.
it has to switch to where it's like you're doing the work really for you, not to try to get something external to happen that's out of
Right.
your control.
Right.
Right. And so, I mean, there's plenty of people that start the recovery process because of, maybe they got court ordered or they're just kind of backed into a corner and then they get in there and they're like, maybe I do want
That's
this.
that's right. Yeah, that's right. I sometimes joke that when families come in, it's like they come in thinking that they want to buy a vacuum cleaner, but they really need to buy a microwave, like a microwave,
Right.
So it's
Right.
like they come in being like, "Hey, could you teach me how to fix my loved one? And I'll take perfect notes and I'll do it perfectly." And you
Right.
know, our job is sometimes to try to convince them, like, I know you think you need a vacuum cleaner, but I promise it's a microwave that
It's
you need.
really, yeah, it's really
Right.
just the
And that
microwave.
it just takes time to kind of make that transition. And I think that when you hear it, especially the influence of other families, it starts clicking a
Yeah.
little, and I don't think we always understand it the first time we hear it. We hear it and we're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. But then we keep doing the same old stuff as a family. I think it's, I always say you have to hear it 300 times from 300 different people in
Hmm.
300 different ways and they all become sort of like little threads that make a strong rope. And it's
Right.
like the more that you hear it, at a meeting, in a book you read, on a podcast, it's
Right.
like they all start to form this new way of thinking until you really realize it is you that has to change for your own sake and
Yeah.
that your loved one may be positively influenced by you changing, but you were never powerful enough to fix them.
Right.
You have to fix who you have control over, which is you.
You and only you.
Yeah.
And yes. Well, I just want to really thank you so much for coming on. This has been a great conversation. I could go all day with you because I love it. I love being able to talk to someone who really understands, who like, I can relate to. And I know
Same.
that like my audience will get so much out of this because it's just been a really great conversation. And I really appreciate you. Now we've been kind of talking about your course. So can you just
Sure.
tell people how, if they are interested, which I think is great foundational work for anybody to start going down. If you're in this world, if you're trying to figure out what to do with your loved one, I think the course is a great foundational course. I highly recommend it to anyone who's listening. So if you could just please tell people how they can find it.
Yeah, thanks. It is easy to find. It's at collaborativecounseling.podia, Podia.com.
Hmm. Okay.
Collaborativecounseling.podia.com. That's the access page. There's a whole bunch of information about the course. Actually, at the bottom of the page, if you scroll all the way down at the bottom, there is a freebie 15-minute session if you want to get. I think I
Amazing.
even
Yeah.
mentioned it about the co-addiction stew. I talked about that just briefly
Yeah.
to just get a little bit of a feel for the course and how it works if you want to kind of sample it. But yeah, I would love for you to check it out. It is about 45-minute sessions. The full course is about six 45-minute sessions. It's on demand, self-paced, and I hope you get a lot out of it.
Great. Yeah. Excellent. And now if you are in South Carolina, so if I
I
have any
am.
listeners out there in South Carolina that want to work with Karen, please feel free to reach out and get in touch with her, how can people find you?
Yeah,
That's
so
not the course. Yeah.
my regular office website, my private practice is www.collaborativecounselingllc.com, and you're welcome to reach out to me through there. I often have limited availability, but I'm happy to chat. You can sometimes you'll catch me at a time that I just
Right.
had somebody move or so it's always worth a try. And if not, I'm happy to try to connect you with somebody else.
Yeah.
This is such a complicated world to navigate. I'm always happy to help families sort of find the way or, show them the
Right.
ropes a little bit if in a way that I can.
Right. Right. Well, thank you again, Karen. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for
And
having me. It's really fun to talk with somebody who shares my
yeah.
passion.
And thank you for listening to this podcast. If you want to listen to more or find more information out about this podcast and more of what I do to help families, you can go check out my podcast website at unbreakableBoundariespodcast.com. It's full of other great podcasts, just like this one, full of other great resources. And please remember to share this podcast with others because you never know who may need to hear this. People are often hiding their battles in this arena, and sharing is a great way to provide this valuable resource to a person. You can also go check out my professional website to see more about how I help families at therecoveringfamily.org. And don't forget, there is always hope, even when things seem the most hopeless.